Welcome to our first edition of Tico Tuned In. I am Cici Rojas, your host, and I am joined by Lydia Knopp, our producer and co-host. As a multicultural production company, we work with diversity of clients across many sectors and have access to interesting insight, information, and innovation happening across all industries. Instead of talking about one segment or topic, this series is a space dedicated to discuss and unpack what's happening now with our business and community partners and their wide span of expertise. Through our network, we have access to many stories, influencers, and experiences, and some really good gossip too. These discussions are curated in real time, covering information for what's ahead. To kick off our first edition, we wanted a true communications veteran who is also very entertaining. So today we will feature Amy Jordan Wooden, because she is certainly both. Amy is the ultimate communications professional who has served elected officials, political candidates, community leaders, private corporations, government departments, trade associations, and not-for-profit institutions. She is recognized as one of the Midwest's most experienced crisis communication specialists and has helped many of her clients navigate some very tricky media and legal situations and has some great stories to tell. Amy launched AJW Consulting in 2003. So Amy, welcome.
Thank you, Cici. I'm honored to be the first guest for Tico Tuned In.
Yes, we're happy to have you. So to begin our discussions, Amy, just going to want to start with some background. Because you have a broad range of clients and experiences. Can you give us your background and experiences as it relates to communications?
Sure. I got my start in politics, started working for then candidate Mel Carnahan, who was running for governor of Missouri back as I was graduating from college, and was really fortunate to have Mel and the entire team as a mentor. And so I worked in politics for a long time until I got married. And my husband and I were moving to Kansas City. And although in Mel's office, I held a variety of roles, I was never the press secretary. But I really have to credit Betsy Solberg at Fleischman Hillard, right? A real matriarch in our community for communications. Betsy knew the value of working in a governor's office and knew even if you didn't have a formal communications role, you knew communications. And so I was hired by Fleischman Hillard when we moved here to Kansas City in 1999 on the crisis communications team. And what we were gearing up for was to help FH's clients deal with Y2K, which I've totally dated myself now. So yeah, the much ado about nothing Y2K rollover. And so I had the distinct honor of working on the crisis team at FH, and that's where I was really formally trained in crisis communications. And obviously not long thereafter, I decided to hang up a shingle and go out on my own. And it's that training in politics and communications that I think has really served me and my clients well.
Excellent. And throughout your career, you've tackled a multitude of different types of communications roles, and actually just project management, all kinds of different things. But you have emerged through the years as a crisis communication expert. So when in your career did you decide to pivot from maybe a broader range of communication expertise to really laser focusing on crisis communications?
I did a lot of public affairs communications work early on, represented some candidates as they were running for office, or just some difficult other campaigns, if you will. But crisis really emerged for me following the JJ's explosion. So it was then city manager Troy Schulte called me and said, we need your help. We need an outside person to come in and help offer some guidance on the situation following JJ's. And it was after that Troy said, I'd like to keep you around. I think that you could add a lot of value to a lot of our department directors. So that's when I really kind of honed that crisis comms work especially representing a government entity like the city. And that was really some of my proudest moments, and was really, really honored to be a part of Troy's team there.
Well, yeah, that sets you up really well, because you've been able to take that expertise and experience and, you know, and hone it. And you've been able to capture a diversity of clients. You know, I mean, I think everybody has to prepare for some type of unforeseen, you know, crisis, and especially when they least expect it. Are there a few core and common types of strategies that you use regardless of the client or regardless of the industry?
There are. I have AJW's guidelines, right? And you know, you can Google crisis communications, and you're going to get a whole bunch of different lists, and Lord knows there's enough books out there. But what I always try to think about is I've got a few key guidelines that I really try to import upon any sort of new crisis client. And one of those is speed and accuracy always matter. Right? So, and they're equally important. And that can be tough to do in a time of crisis. You want to do it quick, but if you do it wrong, boy, you'll set yourself back. So I've got one example, Lydia. This is one from J.C. Penney that I'll sometimes use when I speak. J.C. Penney found themselves in a situation where somebody noticed that they produced a teapot that unfortunately resembled Adolf Hitler. And so this, of course, you know, this crisis doesn't break because someone calls them, because they find it on social media. And to J.C. Penney's credit, they handled it extraordinarily well. And Lydia, if you'll share the next screen, they were able to very quickly head off any kind of social media when they were tagged about this, and effectively used humor. Sometimes humor is a little bit tough to do, especially in the written word. Not everybody, you know, you lose voice inflection, you lose context. But they did an outstanding job by replying just boom, 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 boom to every tweet out there that tagged this teapot and said, oh, of course, unintentional, you know, we would have gone with something clever and included links to cute snowman and stuff. And I'll tell you, it worked out that the tea kettle sold out. They couldn't keep it on shelves. So that is one where that speed really mattered there. And they were able to take something that could have been really awful and just de-escalate it very, very quickly. You know, I always tell my kids this, but in crisis, another guideline that I have is the cover-up's always worse than the crime. The public is by and large extraordinarily forgiving. If you mess up, you own it, you make restitution, and you move on. By and large, people will absolutely forgive a company. It is when you don't want to own up to it, or you start to finger point, that companies really get into trouble. You'll see up here, geography matters. Oh, go ahead, Cici. Oh, geography matters. That's another one. And this is especially difficult in a COVID environment, right? But what I will say is, in a time of crisis, you've got to have all of your top decision makers in the room or on the screen, as we are doing right now. I've been in a situation where I've had a crisis client. I've gone to the CEO and asked a question, something very vital. I'll go to the CFO and then get a different answer, right? And it's not that somebody's lying, it's just the interpretation and in the way in which they communicate that. So geography matters means that you want to get everybody in the room. Others, legal strategy first, then your PR strategy has to follow. Oftentimes what will happen is a law firm will approach me, and I'm hired by the law firm to help them work with their client on the communications. And, you know, in the good old days, lawyers did not like people like me, but more and more good attorneys understand that when they have a client, they've got to win in a court of law and in the court of public opinion. So that has become a very good, healthy working relationship. I've got on here one voice. That's really, really important. You can't have multiple spokespersons in a time of crisis. And oftentimes that one voice needs to be the leadership. So I always tell folks when they're doing crisis planning, the first time your CEO is on camera should not be in a crisis, right? You want to make sure he or she is practiced. I've got on here humanize the situation. I like to tell the example. A friend of mine owns a company where they test drugs on animals, right? Particularly they work with mice. And I said, what is your greatest fear? And he said that PETA will show up outside of our laboratory doors. And I said, well, what you need to be talking about is the drugs that you are working on and how they impact humans, right? So your testing isn't about the laboratory mice. Your testing is about curing grandma's diabetes, right? And you really want to humanize the work that you do. And the last sort of guideline that I always share with my clients is implementing the action items, right, equals that closure. And that's really, really important. A lot of people just want to respond to the crisis and think it's done. It's not. Again, the public is very forgiving, but you've got to signal you're going to do something different, or you're going to put some policies in place to ensure this doesn't happen again. You've got to do an action that signals a closing of that chapter so that you can move on. And again, you know, Cici, Lydia, you'll see sort of variations on this, but this is over the last, 15 plus years, what I've tend to use with my clients.
And what a timely discussion that we are having today, as next week, a lot of civic things are going to change. Businesses will reopen. We are living in a pandemic right now. And so thinking about those bullet points and beyond bullet points, those actions that you have helped guide your clients and others too, not to harp too much on this, because I know we have been talking about it and hearing about it, but is there advice, that you would give for people living now that, we're kind of, the quarantine in a sense is coming to a closure because we're, implementing these phases of reopening, and it feels like a closure, and yet it feels like a whole new beginning of communication. So thoughts on that, what would you say or give advice to people that are questioning that a little bit?
Yeah, this certainly unprecedented times for everyone, but I think what companies are finding success in is when they're over communicating. And that doesn't mean filling up the inbox of your customers or your stakeholders or whatever. It's more that internal communications. And they're really leaning in to capture culture. What I would advise is really important just from an internal comm standpoint is don't lose that if you go back into a physical location. Don't give up your Wednesday morning coffee check-ins, right, to make sure that everybody's doing okay. Keep those things up. It's entirely possible we're going to go back to this shelter-in-place environment later on in the year. So you want to have that consistency and not have your employees feel like there are different rules for different places, where I work. The other thing that really matters in this time is leadership. And you heard me talk about when I said one voice. It's really important that organizations hear from the top leadership in this time of uncertainty and anxiety. In a time of crisis, a lot of people, they worry about what are we going to say to the news media or our shareholders. But what do you say to your employees? Never, ever forget that the individuals that work for you or represent you or, whatever the organization might be, that's your first line. And so communications with your internal employees are your first line of defense or protection against some of these crises. And so I think that internal communications and team building right now is especially important. Don't lose it when you go back, and know that making those deposits in the bank now will help should you need to call on your employees for help in a time of crisis.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting readjusting to in-person meetings if those happen, or how teams reunite in a way will be really telling over the next couple weeks, but that's great advice.
Yeah, the idea that we're going to lose a handshake in a meeting, right? I remember, right, being young and learning how you give a proper handshake. And that's probably going to go away for a while.
Yeah. Well, I know that we'll probably implement some of those actions that you just talked about at Tico, going into next week and beyond. But thank you for sharing all of that thus far. I can't imagine being a crisis communicator and having this pandemic sort of begin, among all of the other things and all the other crises, and different industries have different crises, but it can all be blanketed under this larger thing that's affecting us all, and in a way kind of uniting us all, or at least lighting a fire under communications and how we talk to people, especially our clients and our audiences. So
yeah, I mean, unlike an individual crisis, this is everyone's crisis. And so I do think that there's a lot more latitude and grace that exists out there.
yeah.
I was talking with a woman I work closely with on projects, and we were talking about, again, the use of humor. And there's a lot more latitude right now to use humor that you might not otherwise be able to use in your workplace. So I would advise, and it's certainly my nature because I tend to tell a lot of jokes, to lean into that.
Do you have any good ones to share with us on the spot?
I had one, the very first, group meeting and it's a pretty small group, pretty high level. One individual showed up the very first day in a bathrobe, right? But, pretending and really disheveled. I mean, really, just disheveled. And then the very next day showed up in a tuxedo, holding a martini glass for a 9 a.m. meeting. And so I just think that there's an opportunity to just have a little latitude and grace.
Absolutely.
We've seen a lot of creativity, I think, and I think that's one of the things that the shelter in place has brought forward, though. People are, trying to figure out how they can still keep things entertaining, still keep people connected. I know we try to do that at Tico. And Amy, the list that you shared earlier on the screen, would you say that that's just a pretty good toolkit, a generic toolkit that most small businesses or, folks can use, whether personally or professionally?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's just sort of the general guidelines. Every crisis is different, right? And what I would say is every crisis I've ever had, there is a curveball that gets thrown at you. So I've got another good example, if you'll indulge me, but this was not my crisis. I do have great stories, Cici, but as you know, I have to take them to the grave. I would never share my client's secrets. So, but this was an example of New Balance tennis shoe, right? So it's the only American manufactured tennis shoe. And this goes back now 4 years, this issue that came up. But New Balance, their vice president of communications or public affairs, right? They kind of created their own crisis. He did an interview, and this was right after Trump was elected over Hillary Clinton. So again, just over 4 years ago. And he was quoted as saying, "The Obama administration turned a deaf ear to us. And frankly, with President-elect Trump, we feel like things are going to move in the right direction." Okay. So this was a tweet from an interview with the Wall Street Journal. So, what he was talking about was the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And, but this was right after the election, where New Balance has their headquarters. Their states like Massachusetts and Maine both voted for Hillary Clinton. Remember that election was one where you had the popular vote and the electoral vote did not match up. They were upside down. And so folks were really angry. So New Balance finds themselves in this situation. Lydia, if you want to play the...
You got it.
Some people are taking out their anger about a Donald Trump presidency on their sneakers. New Balance is facing backlash because it expressed support for Trump's opposition to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP. A New Balance spokesperson also reportedly said the Obama administration had turned a deaf ear to the sneaker company, and that didn't go over well with consumers, as you can see. New Balance released a statement saying it publicly supported the trade positions of Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, and Donald Trump prior to Election Day that focused on American manufacturing, job creation, and we continue to support them today.
So yeah, so their statement after, we were with everybody, but tell that to somebody whose sneakers are now all soot and ash. So, they're trying to manage the situation. Now, here's the curveball that comes in. A white supremacist group picks up on this and issues a statement that New Balance was making a gesture to support white people and support U.S. manufacturing. So now all of a sudden their crisis is tenfold because they have a white supremacist group sort of taking their words and using it for their own purposes. Now, I will say New Balance handled it very well. They issued a statement, what I like to call new sneaker fast, right? They issued a statement denouncing bigotry, et cetera, denouncing the group, and they handled it very well. But that is an example of a curveball that you could never see coming. But if you've got a great team in place, if you've done some crisis planning, you can weather these storms, but it is incredibly stressful.
I'll bet. And I think I'm going to pivot just a little bit. Amy, you've been involved in civic activities too for a really, a long time throughout your career. And one most recent, because you and I served together as board members of Visit KC, which is our Convention Visitors Bureau. Have you been able to bring your communication skill set to the table of your volunteer roles?
I have. So crisis communications is pretty specialized, right? It's not everybody has done it. And so in my board service, it is one skill that I like to bring to the table. I've really, really enjoyed working with Visit KC. I always said, I don't work in the tourism industry. Like I don't have skin in the game per se, but I love Kansas City. I love my town so much. And I want to promote every aspect of it. So I've enjoyed serving because I think it brings a slightly different perspective to the table, right? Not being someone that works in the industry. But then there's also been crisis. I mean, Lord knows our tourism industry is taking a tremendous hit right now. And so to the extent I can offer help as the board member in crisis communications or government affairs or public affairs, I'm happy to do so. It's just, for me, it's about being able to add value. That's all I really want to do. I just want to add a little bit of value when I come to the table, and having some crisis comms experience certainly allows me to do that since it's pretty specialized.
Well, I know we've been certainly lucky to have you and your expertise on the board of Visit KC. I mean, we're, like you said, there's going to be many situations coming up as well as we try to get back on something that looks like normal. But tourism is going to continue to be hit hard for the next several months. So you'll have to, thank goodness we have you there to help guide us through some of the communication issues that we'll have. But Lydia, you want to take it from here? The last question?
Yeah, Amy. So we talked through kind of the progression of your career here, which leads us to this pandemic and, being able to respond directly now. So, going back to when you first started, particularly in politics, but now, you're working with CVBs and tourism, and it's interesting hearing your journey. What's one thing that you wish you had known before maybe embarking on this journey that you would give advice to yourself about?
That's an excellent question. So when I think back to my start in politics, right? I mean, I was 21 years old. I didn't know anything, but I had some amazing mentors. I didn't know they were mentors at the time. Sometimes they were bosses, sometimes they were colleagues, sometimes they were, the elected official themselves. But individuals like Roy Temple, Jill Friedman, Robin Carnahan, like I was really lucky to have these people in my life. And I always say, when you're young, you think you know everything, right? And you don't. But they gave me guardrails, right? And if I would bump up against a guardrail, then they would help not intervene, but help guide me back. Mm-hmm. And I think when I went out on my own, what advice I would give someone, and I do give if anyone wants to go out on your own, is develop your kitchen cabinet, your troop, your wolf pack. I don't care what you want to call it, but assemble. I think it's especially true for women. you gotta assemble that group of individuals who will tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. And, in my work, especially, with the city or with other government entities or whatever, I always felt like it was my job to tell them what they needed to hear, even if that was really hard to say. But I do know no one a disservice by sort of endorsing a communications plan or a path forward that I didn't think was going to be successful. But having that kitchen cabinet, that group of individuals that you can really turn to bounce ideas off, to keep you honest, I think that's really, really essential for any, especially woman in leadership, but any small business owner, solopreneur, whatever. I think that's really important. And Cici, I would throw you in that category. I mean, I know I could call you and you would tell me straight if I needed to be told straight.
Well, I think we tell each other straight. So that's a good partnership.
Cici's in the wolf pack.
I like that term, the wolf pack. That term, I'm gonna steal that one, Amy.
I think it's funny that you mentioned women and you're a women's business enterprise and you deal with crisis communications. And when I was thinking about this conversation today, I have one of my best friends is going into labor today to have her first child. And we've been talking about it and stuff. And I just think something about, women and crisis and birth and all of those things sort of wrap into that related field of being able to communicate what you need, when you need it, especially maybe it's bringing new life into the world or, settling a crisis. But it's interesting that you brought up women and having your group that can help you sustain the work is good.
A friend of mine gave me a Mother's Day card that was just so apropos, and it shows a whole bunch of individuals around a boardroom table, and it says, should we call a crisis communicator or should we just call a mom?
Yeah.
About
Exactly.
the same thing, I would say.
Yeah, it was nice. But I do think it takes a certain kind of personality. And quite honestly, you kind of know if you can handle crisis and embrace it or kind of love it like I do, or if it's not your thing. It just takes a certain kind of personality. And it does, I will say that there is great value when you have a crisis to, whether it's you're turning to a wolf pack or you're turning to a communications consultant or someone on the outside who has some experience. I think that is paramount because you need calm, you need strength, you need clarity. And for some people, a crisis, that gives them more anxiety than childbirth, right? And
Right.
so you want to have some folks at the table that have a few instances, under their belt that can help guide and avoid some really common pitfalls, like one that I explained earlier, not talking to your employees, forgetting about internal comms.
Yeah.
Right.
That brings me, go ahead.
I was going to say, and Amy, some people thrive in crisis. I mean,
guilty.
Thinking back to my career, I've had my share of tricky situations, and I think it really shows fortitude and perseverance, and a little bit of excitement because you're problem solving, and when you solve and you solve it correctly, you've hopefully made some great progress too, along the way for your business or whatever, you're trying to problem solve for, organization, personally, what have you. So I do think that there are some people that just thrive in crisis or chaos, depending on how they get through it on the other side.
And I will tell you, some clients of mine that I've represented, you go through the trenches on some stuff. I would call them very, very good friends now. You kind of make it through that together. It's definitely a bond.
Yeah, it is.
So
we only go ahead, Lydia.
I just, I think that it takes, like you said, a certain type of person to address crisis, but I'm sure that there's some things that you need to do for you to be able to outsource that calmness to, people that need it. So we're going to ask this question to everybody we have on this Tico Tuned In. Maybe this isn't related to how you de-stress or whatever, but what's one thing that you do when no one's watching?
Well, Well, see, I think I'd do it if someone was watching. I think it's I think it's sing and dance. But here's what my kids always catch me on is I listen to rap music really loudly. So I'll have Sirius XM fly on in my car, and I pull in the driveway, turn off the car, and then, Will or Lucy will get in the car with me next time I turn it on, and it is so loud.
Blasted.
But yeah, so I will sing and dance very, very loudly.
It's a great one. I think I do that too. So
Yes.
Well, I told my kids during this crisis on one beautiful spring afternoon, I said, listen, you can come outside and do chores with me, or you can get in the car and you two can go for a ride with the windows down and the music up. Your choice. I think we know which one they chose.
Yeah.
Well, Amy, thank you so much for being our first guest. We really, really, really appreciate it. I really enjoyed hearing from you outside of the work that we do together. It was really great getting a perspective. So
thank you. It was my honor, and this was great fun.
Thank you.